is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Alleen Brown on her series in the Intercept, highlighting the severe climate risks in detention facilities called Climate and Punishment, and Jack Crosbie of our very own AMQuickie newsletter and writer will be joining us later, who is in Ukraine, on Russia's dramatic escalation. Meanwhile, Russia has escalated its aggressive posture towards Ukraine. Yesterday, Putin ordered troops into 2 separatist territories in Ukraine, a violation of international law, and proclaimed that they are independent states, while also denying the existence of Ukraine's sovereignty. On Monday night, the Biden administration responded by issuing sanctions by executive order targeting the separatist regions. More sanctions are likely to come today. But Republicans and Democrats like Bob Menendez are calling for, quote, crushing sanctions on Russia in addition. Republicans in particular keep mentioning cutting off the Nord Stream pipeline, so wonder what interests they may have there. Speaking of Nord Stream, Germany has halted certification of the pipeline, which runs from Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea. Saudi Arabia is loving that. All 3 of Ahmaud Arbery's murderers were found guilty of a federal hate crime statute this morning, meaning they now face an additional life sentence with these federal convictions, I should say, after being convicted on state charges earlier this year. Colombia has decriminalized abortion after years of organizing by women in Latin America. Now, 3 of the 4 most populous nations in Latin America allow abortion. Indigenous nations in North Dakota are suing the state over racialized gerrymandering after the newly drawn House maps groups indigenous voters into 1 House district. And lastly, some good news. Iran and the U.S. seem to be nearing a new nuclear peace agreement. Fingers crossed on that one. All this and more on today's program. That would be massive, as we're talking about war right now. A peace agreement seems like some sort of reprieve, especially because Obama arguably might have been the best thing he did as president, negotiating that peace agreement with Iran. And
yeah, that's a good use of the State Department. I mean, there's plenty of reasons to distrust the State Department, but that is a good use of it, and we should see more of that.
More diplomacy and never closing a diplomatic door, including right now with what's going on with Ukraine. I guess we can just dive right into that. So yesterday was not the day to dive into the complexities of the Cold War rebuild and Ukraine's NATO admission as a potential deterrent to Russia, given what happened after the show, because Vladimir Putin really escalated things. And my sense was things were drawing down. The chest puffing had either plateaued or peaked. Saber rattling, if you will. Not the case. Putin took it to another level last night. And I'll be frank and say that it made me rethink what I now perceive as a blind spot of my own in that story, which is the sincerity and intensity of Putin's USSR reunion rhetoric. In fact, I think my emphasis was poorly timed, honestly, just given what broke after the show yesterday. So I'll get to that in a second. But what happened yesterday is that Vladimir Putin dramatically escalated this conflict, despite the fact that going into the weekend, as I mentioned, things appeared like things were just de-escalating. Macron had brokered or said he had brokered some sort of talk between Putin and Biden. But then yesterday afternoon, here at least, last night in Russia, Putin scrapped all of that and gave this rambling speech that was clearly laying out his nationalist intentions and really imperialist intentions. Yesterday, it appears he's moving even closer in the direction of acting on his desires. He declared 2 separatist regions of Ukraine as a part of Russia, Luhansk and Donetsk. Sorry if I butchered that. This is an escalation because since 2014, there have been conflicts in those regions with the separatists, and it's been bloody since 2014. And now Putin is ramping that up even further. Here he is doing so in his speech yesterday.
В этой связи считаю необходимым принять уже давно назревшее решение незамедлительно признать независимость и суверенитет Донецкой Народной Республики и Луганской Народной Республики. Прошу Федеральное собрание Российской Федерации поддержать это решение, а затем и ратифицировать договоры о дружбе и взаимопомощи, кто захватил и удерживает власть в Киеве. Мы требуем незамедлительно прекратить боевые действия. В противном случае вся ответственность за возможное продолжение кровопролития будет целиком и полностью на совести правящего на территории Украины режима.
So he's absolving himself of all responsibility for any continuation of bloodshed and putting that all on Ukraine if they do not recognize the territories that are technically within their maps as a part of Russia. So this is a clear provocation at the very least. Now, these separatist regions have declared themselves as independent. That's a separate conversation because now he's talking about moving troops into these regions. And he claims ridiculously that they're peacekeeping troops. That in and of itself is a provocation because it inflames tensions in these separatist regions and increases the likelihood of violence, even if, say, troops are not deployed. But now we're talking about troops being deployed, and that's imperialism. And you got to call it for what it is. So Putin, in that speech, also denied Ukraine's sovereignty and history fairly broadly, claiming it was entirely created by Russia, claiming Ukraine was trying to get nuclear weapons, which is lunacy, totally false. But it is very much in keeping with his ideology that he seems to be increasingly actualizing, which is the return of the USSR. He was born of that political period. It has been a part of his political identity, even though his speech was also very anti-communist, we should point out as well. He just wants to exert strength, and that is what his nationalism entails, including his imperialist tendencies as well. He also talked about in the speech the corruption of the Ukrainian government and the pro-Western money that has flowed into Ukraine in order to maintain a nationalist posture against Russia, which is true. That has happened. But Putin making a claim about corruption as a pretext for invasion and denying the sovereignty of a nation is pretty rich, given his own relationship with oligarchs and the consolidation of power of those oligarchs in Russia. Matt, did you want to say something?
Oh, I mean, I got a couple of things to dive in with when you're finished.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, like, we mentioned this a little bit yesterday. I would read double my recommendation of the American Prestige podcast with Derek Davis and Daniel Bessner, where they mentioned this weekend that, look, like, the dismissal of the capacity for an quote-unquote invasion was dismissing a full invasion of, like, sort of Kyiv and stuff. And these regions I think, like Davison said, like I think the left kind of did overlook the possibility for Putin to like have acts of aggression, frankly, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to point, I don't think there should be an overcorrection here. I don't think right, I think anti-war posture is still the proper one. I mean, Daniel Bester tweeted this out yesterday. Seeing some people criticize the supposed tendency on the quote left to attribute every bad action to the U.S. The proper left position is to ask why the assumption is that the U.S. should have a role to play in areas of the world around issues of no importance to U.S. interests. It seems like the default position of many good people is that the U.S. should do quote good things abroad, which in this case seems preventing invasion of Ukraine, and not doing quote bad things, of course, to do good and bad things when needs incredible military capabilities. And also the U.S. must maintain its hegemonic position. And so like these are the things that are just assumed, right? When we have these conversations, I think these are the important things to not think about. And Bessner continues saying, some see criticisms of this tweet basically argue that it suggests a betrayal of the project of left international, right? Like we're not being international if we don't call out Putin equally as our own country. But Bessner says, want to say a few things. In an ideal world, there would be a left international project. There isn't one right now, or at least capable of shaping the world in any real way. Given that I situate myself as a U.S. citizen writing within the U.S. and ultimately to the U.S. public policy making elite, we live in a world of nation states, regardless of what we may desire. And I take that as a foundation of my politics. I think the fundamental lesson of historical materialism is to appreciate your moment and the power constellations within it. So like, I think sort of a lesson learned with regards to not like foreclosing any capacity for other countries to be bad actors. But I also think like no war with Russia over this.
Yeah, I'm not trying to overcorrect. I'm just, I guess I'm because I think that there was a healthy mistrust of what the United States was saying publicly about this.
I mean, we just invaded multiple countries. Like we just stole money from the Afghan treasury. Like right? Like the skepticism is absolutely
and what I said about the money that the United States poured into Ukraine with these groups is true. I mean, and we supported that. And so that is important context, but it was a, unfortunate timing in that way because I maybe naively did not perceive that Putin was going to escalate it to this degree. So I don't want to overcorrect, but I'm also just like a real fan of holding myself accountable a bit.
No, fair enough. And I would say just with regards to like what I would like to see done in case, like, let's say Putin expands and does like invade even like all of Ukraine. I still don't think we should like counter invade. I think it'd be like a Berlin airlift situation where we help people where we can, right? Like those sorts of international responses to aggressors is what we should be coordinating. Unfortunately, like we don't have a desire to strongly coordinate that stuff because if the international community could come together to stop aggressors, they would have stopped us from invading Iraq. Right. But anyway.
Yeah, and Bessner is someone who I've listened to and read about this before. He's a great source if people want to look up his Twitter feed.
And him and Derek are completely like transparent about this stuff, and like you, Emma, they are all for holding themselves accountable. So
yeah. So again, that I think there were a lot of left voices who were saying similar stuff to me, and there's also probably an inherent Americentrism in the way that some on the left are viewing this because it's almost the inverse of the way that Republicans and conservatives do this, because as children growing up during the Iraq War era, a lot of the way that we view imperialism is through a United States context. And that can, and even with Putin's aggression in and of itself, he's become such a like meme in the United States that sometimes I think it went in one ear and out the other to a certain degree what he was talking about. So I still stand by that Bush's decision to scrap an agreement on Ukraine, not joining NATO was insane and rubbed salt in the wound of an already intense situation and exacerbated it. I do believe a lack of reconstruction after the dissolution of the Soviet Union contributed to where we are today, which is a place where an authoritarian, a nationalist, an imperialist like Putin has cemented power in this and is now exercising it on a bordering country, and that is terrifying. So my default position will always be to mistrust saber rattling from the United States and what's coming out of our intelligence services. And I think that should be what our audience does as well. It's going to be more successful more times than not. But in terms of more sanctions, Republicans and hawkish Democrats like Menendez are seeing blood in the water right now. I am in favor of imposing sanctions that are targeted on Russian elites. Right now, the sanctions that the Biden administration is imposing, we're recording this, it's 12:18 p.m. right now. He's going to announce more sanctions today, but it seems to also be targeting investors and high-profile individuals in the separatist regions. We'll see what else comes of it. But, Bob Menendez was quoted in, I believe, Politico today, calling for, quote, crushing sanctions. I'm not in favor of sanctions that affect the Russian people. And often that's what sanctions do. Look, I think the Biden administration is less worried in regards to how sanctions are going to affect the Russian people and more worried that cutting off Russia to that degree is going to drive them into the arms of China, which is the number one concern of hawks in this country, Chinese hegemony. And given the state of U.S. empire and their investment in maintaining it, I think that that's a fair fear. But for now, we'll see. This is an evolving story, but just wanted to make clear, avoiding war at all costs is the position of this show and is my position as well. And that's where we're at. All right, folks, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will be joined by Alleen Brown to talk about her series in The Intercept, Climate and Punishment. We are back, and we are joined by Alleen Brown on her series in The Intercept called Climate and Punishment, about the insane and scary climate risks in detention facilities. Alleen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I mean, let's just put up, if we could, Bradley, her series in The Intercept here. This is a 3-part series, unless there are more to come, but potentially.
Yeah. I mean, we see this as an ongoing series, so we'll continue to add stories to this as the season goes on, I think.
So here we have it. It's called Climate and Punishment, and is it up? Okay, yeah, and it's 3 parts as of right now: boiling behind bars, dark, smoky cells, trapped in the floods. I'd recommend everybody check it out, but we'll talk a little bit about all 3 parts that are up right now today. It's incredibly well done, and the visuals in the story that you won't be able to see when we're chatting about this are excellent as well. So I guess let's start first with a big picture question. What inspired you to write this series, and kind of what really gave you the tip off that this was going to be your focus, that people who are incarcerated in this country are going to be bearing the brunt of climate change to this insane degree?
I mean, I would say as a reporter that often is covering climate-related issues, I'm always thinking about who is the most vulnerable to the myriad problems that the climate crisis creates. So, I was really thinking about I think the spring or summer was coming, and thinking about these disasters that were likely to come, and how I was going to cover them. So wildfires, hurricanes, and again, I thought about who was the most vulnerable and how we could tell their story in a meaningful way. I also started talking to my colleague Akil Harris, who is really my co-reporter on this, and is a developer. He's our newsroom researcher and developer. And so he sort of had the skills to create this big picture data project that would allow anyone to find out how any facility might be impacted by climate risks.
So we can start, I guess, with a very recent example of how the wildfires in California affected the prison population there. The dark, stormy cells piece in the series with the Intercept. You begin this part by telling the story of two prisons affected by last year's Dixie Fire in California. Explain, if you could, what happened on these prison campuses.
Yeah, so we looked at a couple different places. One was the California Correctional Center, which is in this small rural prison community called Susanville. There, people incarcerated in this facility first noticed the impact of the fire, not only because of the smoke, but also because they lost power. So starting in July, these power lines were impacted by the fire, and the facility was supposed to be operating on generator power. The problem was, according to people incarcerated there, that the emergency generator was not working properly. So by the time the Dixie Fire was getting even closer and really kind of threatening the community of Susanville, people had been stuck, locked in their cells for more than a month with no lights. So, they're literally in the dark. They don't know what's going to happen to them when the fires get closer. They're also inhaling a lot of smoke from the fires. And in some cases, people said that they had padlocks put on their door because the locks are typically electronic. So, they're asking. One guy said he asked a corrections officer what would happen if the fires got too close, and he just kind of laughed and said, "You guys will stay here." I also heard that the ventilation and toilets would stop working for hours at a time. So it was just a really miserable, terrifying experience.
Yeah, and you mentioned briefly the question by the incarcerated person to the guard, what would happen and what are the procedures. What struck me about what you wrote about is that there's just no ability to flee from these fires. Mm-hmm. They're going to keep them there until the last possible second, and it doesn't seem like these corrections facilities take a plan seriously on how to save these people's lives, especially because they're already treating them with such inhumanity in the first place.
Right. I mean, this is, I think, one of the most important things to remember about how the climate crisis impacts incarcerated people is that they're just totally reliant on the state to take care of them and to decide when they should get away from the thing that's causing, safety issues. And of course, all these corrections departments say that they have plans, they have evacuation plans, emergency plans, but they won't share details. There's no transparency. No one will share details because it's a security risk. And, for people who are incarcerated and their families, that just doesn't make them feel very reassured, especially in the wake of or in the midst of the pandemic, where people really felt that they were not protected, not given vaccines and treatment and kind of quarantine procedures that would have been appropriate. There's just very little trust in this very untransparent system.
Are prison evacuations done well even under best of circumstances when there isn't a wildfire that could kill everybody involved?
Right. I mean, this is the thing. They don't, I mean, experts in, I guess, prisons and emergency management say that like it's a logistical nightmare. You're moving at sometimes thousands of people at a time. You have to find a secure facility to put them. You know, the people that you're moving are considered security risks themselves. So, and, you know, I guess, quote unquote, criminals. So, a lot of times people end up in really kind of poor conditions, sort of sometimes facilities that haven't been used in a while. Sometimes, you know, in one case, I think it was in Oregon, in the last couple years, people were put in a facility alongside former members of the same gang that they were no longer affiliated with, and you know, they experienced retaliation. With COVID, it's been a huge problem with there not really being, a lot of people are reporting that there haven't been a lot of efforts to separate people with COVID from the rest of the population when evacuations do happen. So it's just, it tends to not go well.
Yeah, I mean, the COVID conversation has been fairly well documented, and even that, given even COVID in general and how that's treated in prisons and detention facilities, is a climate change adjacent conversation in and of itself, because these pandemics are going to continue to happen with more frequency the more that we encroach and the wildlife populations mix with the human populations and these diseases begin to proliferate. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the data, because we don't have the map here, but the Intercept did a bunch of, and this is so people can go check out your piece, these really intricate maps of where these facilities are even located. What are some of the percentiles in terms of the location of detention facilities in high-risk wildfire areas?
Sure. So, you know, I mean, we focused a lot on California in our reporting, and I think we found that about a fifth of jails, prisons, detention centers in California are in above the 95th percentile for wildfire risk in the nation. That facility we talked about, California Correctional Center, is in the 90th percentile for wildfire risk. You know, but it was also pretty interesting to see that it's not just California facing a lot of risk. You know, certainly Idaho and some other states in the West have a large proportion of their facilities facing extreme risk. But we also found a ton of facilities in Florida that have elevated wildfire risk. I think we looked at some of the largest facilities in the nation facing really high wildfire risk, and we noticed that the Everglades Correctional Institution has very high risk. And, you know, you hear that name and you think of like water, and you wouldn't imagine that wildfires would be a problem. But actually, there have been 2 or 3 fires over the last decade that have come close to the facility and raised alarms. So, you know, I think we are seeing the fires get so big and intense in California and the Pacific Northwest, but really they're getting worse everywhere. So I think it's something that places that don't think about it now will have to more.
You mentioned Florida there, and I guess that's a good way to transition into one of the thirds of your piece here, one of the 3 parts, the trapped in the flood section. With floodwaters rising, prisoners wait for help in floating feces. Okay, that paints a picture, and that's exactly what happened in one of these Florida detention facilities that are definitely at risk of increased risk of flooding. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in Florida's detention facilities.
Yeah, so we identified more than 50 facilities in Florida with kind of major to extreme flood risk, according to our scale. And one of them with severe flood risk is called the Cross City Correctional Institution. And this facility is located in Dixie County, which flooded pretty miserably this summer. After Hurricane Elsa, rain just kept pouring and the county kind of turned into a lagoon. Really, it got minimal national media attention. Nobody really noticed that this was happening. It's a pretty low income rural area, and it relies on this prison for a lot of its economy. And of course, there were many people there kind of suffering. And so, at first visitation hours were canceled, which are can be a lifeline for a lot of people who are incarcerated. But later, we talked to this guy, Duran Jones, who said that at one point, water started kind of like coming up through the sewage system, and he sat in his cell for hours with ankle deep water with, human waste floating in it. He said that they were fed in this condition. And eventually, later that day they were evacuated, but versions of this have happened in a number of places. I think the Orleans Parish Prison during Hurricane Katrina is the most extreme example, where people are in like chest deep water. But U.S. Penitentiary Beaumont has repeatedly had really poor conditions after hurricanes. A lot of times, not having the kind of ventilation and functioning toilets that people should expect. And so, yeah, it's kind of this issue of flooding and storms impacting prisons and jails can be considered chronic, I think.
And it seems like this is also a direct result of DeSantis's neglect in the state of Florida, that there's a huge number of prison guard positions that are unfilled. And I'm in favor of ending mass incarceration. I believe we should have many less prisons, except for in extreme examples. But if you're going to have these prisons and you're going to be responsible for these people's lives, the level of neglect that DeSantis has shown seems to be particularly acute.
Yeah, it's quite extreme. There's one Republican senator that's actually been really especially vocal on this, that, I think something like a third of the corrections officer positions are open. So they're really operating without a lot. And that, that really means that the people incarcerated inside have less freedom in a way. And, there's also this huge backlog of maintenance issues. So in Florida, and a lot of these facilities are not air conditioned. So people are really suffering in Florida. And I think that system is facing a pretty acute crisis in more ways than one.
So how many of you talked about this, but I don't have the number in front of me right here. How many of these facilities are run by DeSantis himself and the state of Florida itself?
I don't have the number in front of me, but it is, I think, we identified around 50 in Florida in total facing significant risk. DeSantis and the state of Florida, I think, manages the largest proportion of that. And we found that Florida manages kind of the largest proportion of high flood risk facilities compared to any other kind of agency or, I guess, government entity. So Florida plays a big role here. And again, there's also this heat risk and wildfire risk there to take into account. So they're facing a real crisis.
And now, speaking of Republican governors that are both cruel and incompetent, let's move to Texas, the boiling behind bars part of your special here. In sweltering Texas, prisons without air conditioning are about to get a lot hotter. Tell the story of Justin Phillips in your piece, who was living in an unconditioned cell in Texas during the 2018 heat wave.
Yeah. So Justin Phillips, his story is really kind of representative of the beginning of this grassroots movement for air conditioning in prisons in Texas. So Justin was diagnosed with this rare kidney condition just as right when he was first incarcerated, and very quickly was moved into the Cofield unit in Texas, which had no air conditioning. So he says that his condition really deteriorated over that time. His blood pressure medication made him ill when it was really hot, so at times he would skip doses. There was also this issue of problems with the medical system in prison itself. He said a lot of times he wasn't escorted to take his other medications. And, the experts we spoke to said that heat is really hard on the kidneys, especially when you have a condition as serious as Justin's.
Well, it dehydrates you, right? So it's that's difficult.
Right, exactly. So, Justin's wife, Casey, really fought for him from outside, trying to get him removed from a situation that she really believed was going to kill him. And eventually, through like many phone calls and emails, got him transferred out of the Cofield unit. We looked at some temperature records from that time, or heat index records, and around the time he was transferred, there was a day when the heat index outside was recorded as 127 degrees. We don't know how hot it was inside, but it could have been hotter. So the heat really was extreme, and in the wake of this, Casey Phillips, Justin's wife, began really organizing around this issue and helped start this organization, Texas Prisons Air Conditioning Advocates, which is now Texas Prisons Community Advocates. And they've really been a force advancing legislation around heat protections, which has not so far passed.
So Abbott, I didn't realize until reading this in your piece that he has been trying to stop air conditioning in prisons actively for years at this point, which is, it's impossible to fathom. But then you remember that this is the guy that went behind the podium and bragged about how many executions that he had presided over as governor of the state. How extensive has his role been in preventing the installation and infrastructure of air conditioning in some of these prisons?
Yeah, so he's played this very key role. Back in 2011, there were a bunch of lawsuits or it was after 2011. In the summer of 2011, a number of people died from heat-related causes. And a number of their family members filed lawsuits in Texas. Governor Abbott at that time was the attorney general. So he was in a position, his office was directly in this position to defend the state against these families that were saying that they were really being harmed by these problems. Fast forward to today, he's the governor and really plays a vital leadership role in deciding what kind of legislation he will advance. So this past fall, the most recent air conditioning legislation that the organization I mentioned introduced, it was during this special session where Governor Abbott was directly responsible for setting the agenda. What he said kind of is what they would focus on this during the session, and the legislation did not advance. They'd introduced it 2 other times, and it sort of failed to move. And now it'll be a couple years because Texas's legislature only meets every 2 years. It'll be 2023 before they really have a chance to fight for heat relief again.
How many of the facilities in Texas even have air conditioning?
So based on 2020 figures, we found that I think about a third had full air conditioning. These are state prisons. The jails are air conditioned. So about a third of state prisons had full air conditioning. Around 21 at that time had no air conditioning. Another 50 or so had partial air conditioning, which in some cases was like 100 beds in a massive facility. So there's really, tens of thousands of people suffering in the heat in Texas.
Of the states that you were able to map, I mean, you highlighted 3 large states. Did you see a connection between the sheer number of facilities and also the lower standard of conditions that were provided in those facilities? The larger the state, the more prisons, the less likely that those prisons are going to not be vehicles of human torture and suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't say for sure that like Texas is treating its prisoners worse than Connecticut or something. We didn't quite do that kind of analysis, but we did think that those were good places to focus because of the scale of control that the state has over people. These are massive state prison systems, and if a shift in their practices impacts the most people. There are also states that are sort of notorious for the climate impacts that they're facing. So it was sort of natural to focus on those places. But, I would also say a place like New York would be really interesting to look more into. We spoke to a researcher who told us that, in the Northeast, a 90-degree day or, 90-degree days can increase the mortality of incarcerated people by as much as 18%. So, there's not the kind of acclimation in some of the states that we didn't focus on that there is in Texas or Florida, for example. So the issues kind of take different forms depending on where you are in the US.
Right. And another kind of, I guess, distinction I'm curious about, was there any data that you found that differed or showed different results between private prisons and ones that were run by the state, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're curious about. A lot of private facilities actually are not a part of our data set just because we relied on this very specific, albeit massive, list of like more than 6,500 facilities that the Department of Homeland Security put together. One of our kind of data partners on this, this carceral ecologies team at UCLA has identified I think a few dozen private facilities that aren't in that DHS database. So we haven't been able to do that kind of comparison, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I'm very curious to see, and I mean, probably part of the reason that there even are private facilities is because they go under the radar in these large data sets, and it makes it harder for journalists like yourself to aggregate that, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's been hard. We identified ICE facilities within our data, but it just, these contracts are constantly shifting and moving around. So it's hard. We had to be very clear about this being a snapshot as of 2020, although, I think it's still accurate for most of the facilities that we documented.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to reading a bit more of what you have to write over at the Intercept. Everyone, please check out the Climate and Punishment series. Check out the interactive maps and graphics there. There's also a video up that you'll be able to see. Alleen Brown, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, we are going to take a quick break, come back, and then we will be diving a bit more into Ukraine. We are here with Jack Crosbie of the AMQuickie and a writer at a variety of publications, including you recently had a piece in Rolling Stone about Ukraine, stationed in Ukraine. Thank you so much for coming to chat with us on short notice.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Emma.
Yeah, and I should say that I am now a regular reader of the AMQuickie. Everyone else should check it out as well, even though I technically don't have to because I do the news on my own here. But I like it so much that I got to read it.
It's a good thing to get. It's a good place to be.
Very well done.
Corey Pine has been taking over duties for me. We usually split it, but he's running the show now because I'm over here and the time difference is crazy, and I got some other things going on. But I'll be back on the Quickie hopefully in a week or so. We'll see.
Gotcha. All right. Well, awesome. I mean, thanks again for doing this. You're on the ground in Ukraine. Just how are you? What's your sense of what you're seeing there? And just after Putin's dramatic escalation yesterday, I'd imagine tensions are amazingly high.
Yeah. So I'm in a city called Kyiv right now. It is sort of in northeastern Ukraine. It's the second largest city in the country. And it's right on the border with Russia. So this is one of the cities that's like kind of been a tension point in this crisis because a large amount of Russia's like military buildup. This is basically the closest urban center in Ukraine to the Russian border. I flew in here. I spent some time in Kyiv, speaking to people there, and did a couple of stories. I've mostly, as you said, been working for Rolling Stone on this trip. Did a few stories there, and then recently, just before we got to Kharkiv, we spent a couple of days down in the Donbass region, which is the region that's in the news now and has been for the past 8 years, because it was this is the site of the initial Russian invasion in 2014, and kind of the area that has been sort of propped up as these separatist republics, which are were effectively Russian occupied territory and now are officially Russian occupied territory.
And in terms of the way that Putin has now made this public declaration, what effect does that have to people on the ground, the separatists, the groups of people that would rather be a part of Russia as opposed to in Ukraine? How much does that embolden those groups? And what's your sense of the split in the area that you're currently in?
Well, I mean, Kharkiv is a Russian-speaking city for the most part. The language denominations don't really correspond to political opinions. And I think what I've learned, especially from reporting in areas that have like intimately experienced this conflict for the past 8 years or so, is that politics kind of blurs down there for a lot of these people. And what the vast majority of them want is just any sort of system that will give them a sense of stability, basically.
Right.
I think, sort of at the beginning of the conflict, there were a lot of these attempts to like define like certain cities in Ukraine as pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian or pro this or pro that and stuff like that. And I think you will find those people. There are certainly, there are always going to be people who are enthusiastic about politics one way or another, that are extremely pro-Ukrainian, that are extremely even pro-separatist. I think it's worth noting, though, that sort of before Russian intervention or invasion, as it I think can be classified, in 2014, there wasn't really like a flourishing separatist movement in these places. There were certainly tensions. I think it goes back a long way. These portions of Ukraine had sort of been economically depressed for a lot of years and had felt sort of isolated and cut off from the country, and perhaps like not really as attended to by the government. So there was sentiment there, but there wasn't really a flourishing like separatist movement until it was essentially created as a result of the sort of ratcheting up of tensions for political reasons after Russia's annexation of Crimea et cetera, et cetera. So when you speak to people down there, yeah, I mean, when I was in Donetsk, the city under separatist control in 2015, you would find people that said, like, yes, we love the idea of Novorossiya, we want to be an independent republic, blah, blah, blah. You find those people just like you find people on the Ukrainian side who are, you know, hardcore Ukrainian nationalists. But the people most affected by the conflict really just like want people to stop blowing up their houses.
Right.
Whoever that is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and what's your sense on the ground of, and this is probably hard to delineate, but artificial involvement by both Russia and the United States in terms of, like, say, propping up a Ukrainian nationalist movement versus, and on the flip side, Russia now openly with Putin's proclamation, that's an obvious example. But prior to that, their involvement in the nationalist, or I'm sorry, the separatist movement in the eastern regions of Ukraine.
So, I mean, I guess we'll start with the much more sort of easy to identify one. You know, as I mentioned, the separatist movement in eastern Ukraine and the separatist government and the separatist militaries down there do not exist in basically any form without the direct involvement, support, armament, and like direct troop on the ground involvement of members of the Russian military. It has effectively been occupied territory for the past 8 years, and now it's officially occupied territory. Ukraine's, I guess U.S. involvement in Ukraine and what you're speaking of like Ukrainian nationalism, especially like far right elements in it and stuff like that, is a factor as well. It's something that we've seen throughout this conflict. When the conflict began in 2014, the Ukrainian military was very sort of like underfunded and unorganized, and this sort of like Russian-backed separatist movement that was in a large part supported by, you know, Russian special forces and troops and things like that, made some like really serious advancements onto Ukrainian government territory really quickly. And what we saw at that phase of the conflict, that a lot of the people who were able to mount an armed response to that very quickly were these sort of Ukrainian ultranationalist groups that we talk about, like these ultranationalist militias and things like that, the Azov battalion, the OUN battalion, that like a lot of these things that you know leftists in the US have been very concerned about for a long time, and for good reason. These were some of the first groups to really start fighting. And I think, you know, US concerns or concerns among leftists that the US is like funding and supporting these groups are definitely valid. I'm not sure that they're the best entry point into the conflict as it is currently, but I think it is something that we need to like very much keep an eye on,
monitor.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, there's more to that, how like a lot of these battalions have sort of been folded into the Ukrainian like the traditional Ukrainian military. They've sort of been absorbed into the National Guard, which is hugely problematic for obvious reasons, but it's also made it it's also in some ways limited their sort of like reputational aspects as like the only ones that are fighting for Ukraine, right? Ukraine has sort of like homogenized its military more to where it's a broader like nationalist effort, rather than just like Ukrainian nationalism comes in a lot of forms, I think, in a lot of countries. And in Ukraine, some of it, yes, is going to be extremely far right, and some of it is not. You know, there are plenty of liberals in Ukraine who feel very strongly pro-Ukrainian and Ukrainian nationalists, but that are not really in any way connected to the far right. Right.
So in terms of the way that the left in the United States has covered it, do you think that there's a bit, because, you know, a lot of us are looking at this through the lens of, like, say, post-Iraq war, or, you know, post-war on terror or current war on terror America, an overemphasis on like the far right, basically fascist elements that have been propped up by the US, as opposed to the broader nationalism, where it's less, centering of U.S. involvement, then that's probably an overemphasis, basically.
Yeah. I think in short, yes, exactly. I don't want to say that like leftists are wrong to focus on those right-wing elements and things like that. I think it's also important to consider, and like not really to do whataboutism, but that the Ukrainian nationalists and the far-right elements in Ukraine are definitely there, but Russia is also a far-right government, a far-right, like explicitly imperialist, interventionist, far-right regime. I don't think it's particularly useful to draw equivalencies between the Russian regime and the US regime and say like which one is like more right-wing or something like that. But it is, I think what you're getting at here is that leftists in the United States and the leftist picture of the world has for so long been really focused, righteously so, on combating the effects and the overreach of US imperialism throughout the globe, that I think sometimes that's caused a little bit of a blind spot to the fact that there are other malicious actors on a global scale, and that there are other far-right governments and far-right sort of interventionist systems that are not the United States. So like none of that lets the US off the hook, right? But I think it does add additional context to these conflicts.
Well, I'm not to make the comparison, but I'm going to make a comparison just really briefly, because when you hear Putin talk about Ukraine's trying to develop nuclear weapons, all right, that sounds a little like the United States. I mean, but independent of that, that's just really a transition. Can you talk about that claim
right,
and really the absurdity of it?
Right. I mean, this is one of the funniest. Well, it's not really funny because it could turn into a massive, hugely destructive war. But it's been interesting looking at how Putin has kind of like set up this intervention in Ukraine. And some people have noted that he's used certain tactics and things like that very closely mirror U.S. and NATO interventions in the Balkans and in Kosovo and things like that. And he's set up, like, his pretext for war here is that he's sending in peacekeeping troops on a humanitarian mission to protect the civilians, the brave, culturally Russian civilians of these breakaway republics. And I think, it's the parallels definitely are there to, I guess the takeaway is that an explicitly imperialist regime is going to find an excuse for war and go to war no matter what anyone else does, right? And I think, both the United States and Russia have done that, and we're seeing Russia do that in a way that doesn't even seem particularly concerned over how obvious it is. They can just say anything, and it doesn't really matter. They can say the nuclear weapons thing, and it's not, it's not aimed at a US audience or anything like that. It's just aimed at giving them any kind of sort of plausible deniability or to curry domestic support, I think.
So I guess the get down to brass tacks question is what is the sense of the likeliness of war, as opposed to, say, these peacekeeping troops entering, there being an annexation, or there's already been a lot of bloodshed in eastern Ukraine, which I'm hoping you can touch on as well, since 2014. What is the sense of how likely the Russia's desires are going to be fulfilled?
I think it's incredibly likely. I think the variable that's most concerning right now is we have not been throughout most of this conflict entirely sure on what the extent of Russia's desires are. So to sort of expand on that, the practical question right now is whether or not Russia uses its military, which has already entered these occupied regions of Ukraine. Whether or not Russia uses its military to expand the pre-existing borders of those regions to the overall borders of those they're called oblasts, but essentially states of Ukraine before the 2014 war. So what happened in 2014 is that there was this the war that sprang up through the Russian-backed sort of Russian proxies and the separatist group in these regions in the Ukrainian government, and the war went sort of back and forth for a long time in the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. Territory changed hands for a while. In about the middle of 2015, the front lines basically stabilized and haven't really moved since then. Those front lines, though, do not correspond to the original borders of those two oblasts, Donetsk and Luhansk. The regional authorities of these separatist republics, these Russian-backed proxies, claim ownership over the entire oblast of the two. So it'd be like, for instance, if like California and Oregon decided to secede together, right? And they fought a war with the US government, and California and Oregon's like secessionist authorities ended up with like half of California and a scrap of Oregon. And then a third country came in and they said, we recognize your existence, not with your scrap of California and your scrap of Oregon, but with all of California and all of Oregon. And that's essentially what Russia has done today. I believe that Putin said, you know, we recognize their claim to the entire sort of like pre-war borders of these two oblasts, these two states within Ukraine. And we are willing to use Russian military force to support their claim to those borders. What that means in practice is if Russia does intend to find a justification for or move those existing front lines, is going to be enormously costly and destructive to human life and everything on a scale of something that we haven't seen in decades, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, the Biden administration has said they're as much that they're not really interested in the ground war, especially on Russia's turf, which would not go well. But at the same time, there's not much in terms of deterrence. It seems like that they can exercise. Already 14,000 people have died since 2014 in this internal civil battle in Ukraine. And I mean, the death toll would likely, I mean, I don't even want to speculate, but it would be incredibly bad if this were to obviously, if bloodshed were to happen, if blood were to be spilt, which Putin basically said as much yesterday in his speech. Do you still think, though, that this is a very elaborate, it could be a very elaborate and aggressive way for Putin to basically nudge the separatist areas into annexation without bloodshed? I mean, maybe that's me looking at this through rose-colored glasses, but that is... It seems like that could be possible to avoid more death.
It's certainly possible. I think that's honestly the solution that a lot of people, myself included, I would say, are sort of hoping for at this point. You know, the Russian government has had effective control over those regions since 2014. Basically, they could have formally annexed them at any time. They could have, you know, they could have done this basically at any time. I think what's so concerning to a lot of people is the level of buildup on, you know, Ukraine's other borders with Russia and borders with Belarus and things like that. It goes back to what I said, is that we don't. I think everyone right now is guessing basically at what. And I know it's a cliche to be like, what's in Putin's head? This is what, you know, that a lot of the liberal
We're gonna look into his heart like Bush.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
You know, like people have been obsessing over this for years and years and years. But what I think we've seen in the past couple of days in his control over even the sort of bureaucracy of his own government, and in the speech that he made a couple of nights ago, is that the decision making for what happens in this conflict is really basically coming solely down to him and what he decides. And so for me, I just don't know. There's I think a good chance that what he wants out of this is, and what he feels he needs to pursue for Russia's, security concerns is outright regime change in Ukraine, to get them back to a leader that effectively functions as a proxy in a similar way that the leaders of Belarus and places like that do.
And that's so, and just sorry, don't mean to cut you off. I mean, that's he's doing that most likely because Ukraine is still not a part of NATO, even though there's that threat. But two, because it's also just a massive border share. It would be a huge territory to have, and a huge ally in terms of just the size of the nation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm definitely not one of the on Putin's mind experts, or even really like a European security expert in general. But I think he did make it very clear in that speech the other night that he does not really respect the idea of Ukrainian sovereignty in any way. And so I think that discussion, goes back to like, how do we decide what a sovereign nation is? How do groups of people on this earth decide to differentiate themselves, and what does that make up? I think in the current system of world governance that we have, it's pretty hard to make a case that Ukraine as a nation does not deserve to have sovereignty and self-determination. But the question of NATO is obviously a lot more thorny than that. Ukraine very strongly wishes to join NATO, and NATO has essentially sort of held that as a threat toward Russia, but also prevented Ukraine from doing that because they know that it would be such a huge provocation. But the reasons that Ukraine wants to join NATO are extremely clear, because they're not in NATO and they have now been invaded twice. So I don't know if that's, I'm not going to come on the Majority Report and like make a extremely pro NATO argument that it should exist in the global system overall, right? But the reality of the situation right now is that NATO does exist, a non-NATO affiliated country, but that is generally economically and politically inclined more with NATO states and the European Union. It has been invaded in an overt imperialist hostile action by another state.
Well, Jack, I can't thank you enough for coming on, especially with such short notice. I think I've said that a few times, but it really was a huge help. And stay safe. Hope all is well. And everybody should check you out on Twitter, read your work. And I'm looking forward to reading what you're going to be putting out there for Rolling Stone, including to the piece that you already have up with them. Yeah. Jack, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Emma.
Yep. All right, folks, with that, we are going to head into the fun half, talk a little bit more about this, take your calls. But first, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Oh, yeah, Left Reckoning. Oh, I got to change my headphones.
All good.
Left Reckoning, we had on the Jewish question, Karl Marx. We continued our reading series of early Karl Marx writings, and this is another one where he's taking on the members of the young Hegelians who are too focused on idealism, in this case religion, saying and making anti-Semitic arguments, saying, hey, if Jewish folks want liberation, they need to first liberate themselves from their religion before we give them political rights. Marx. Marx was against that, so we talk about that, and the problematic part 2 of the essay where he traffics in some of the tropes, and we get into Marx's family history with converting from Judaism and that sort of thing. So
nuance.
Yeah, a lot of history that you might want to be interested in having at your fingertips in case people like Stefan Molyneux like to bring up the part 2 of On the Jewish Question to argue that Marx was simply like a Jew hater, and it's good to know actually the extent that Marx did traffic in bigotry and actually what he was saying in those essays. So patreon.com/leftreckoning for that.
All right. Well, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, and chocolate. Use the code majority, get 10% off. Did I do that right? I gotta write that down. We're gonna be taking your calls 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what? A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back in the fun half. We have opened up the phones. And I'm sure some people will have some opinions. As they should. FabuCat58. Putin criticized Lenin, who viewed all Soviet republics as equal. Putin wants to return to the time of czars, when Russians subjugated Ukrainians, Mongolians, Belarusians, Polish, and all other non-Russians. It's a good point. I think I should have. I'm not sure if I mentioned this when we were talking about this, but the speech was very anti-communist too, in terms of what it was criticizing in its history. Extra fashy candy. Emma's right. The U.S. was like, we know how to escalate geopolitics, and then Putin said, "Oh yeah, hold my beer." RBFP. Emma, loved your interview with Diva Woodley. The way she explained radical black feminist pragmatism was so inspiring and grounded. Yeah, I thought she was phenomenal. I really did. So much so that I understood almost all the terms and spelling. Now it's just about understanding enough so I can talk to my mom and sister about it. I will watch it 26 times more and then watch it another 10 odd times. Well, I mean, I appreciate your dedication. Dimmy Joring. I just rewatched Sam's debate with Dimmy from 5 years back and laughed at how wrong he was about how the Dems can flip the House, but looks like Republicans are actually following that playbook. Biden is super uncompetitive, and in record time, Republicans will take over the House. I mean, the Democrats did take back the House in the off year, but
with the help of like Justice Democrats and stuff that Jimmy shits on all the time.
Connor from Seattle. Hey, I got a new, gotta keep yesterday's new job hype train chugging. Not a new job, but I got an offer from a different company and used that to leverage a pay raise where I currently work. We've got the power. All right, should I try a shofar with myself? That was all right. Extra fashy candy. Matt, slow down. I guess when you were talking too fast, right? That mic's not up. Do it.
Also, guys, I linked to the Bessner tweets so you guys can in YouTube chat so you can see it there.
Nice.
And go fight with him about it.
Yeah. I mean, I respect him a lot, and that was, you know, whatever. It's just like we don't need to get into it all the time. Calling from a 219 number says, also Putin doesn't want another Soviet Union. He made that clear in his speech. The Union implies sovereign nations. He wants the Russian Empire to electric boogaloo, ethno-nationalist, hyper-capitalist, orthodox run hellhole. That's a good distinction. I appreciate that. Yes. Chris from Taiwan. Putin's actions aren't necessarily evidence that the U.S. wasn't BSing about all of this in whole or in part to be deliberately provocative. Dazzler, I understand the left's healthy distrust of the United States, especially in regards to foreign policy, but what I still can't understand is the knee-jerk reaction a lot of the left seem to have with Russians posturing towards Ukraine to believe the entire thing was made up whole cloth by the U.S. That's a very specific group.
I don't know. I see people say things like, you don't put troops at the border without a reason. It's like they do it all the time.
Yeah.
This isn't the first time that there's been troops on the border.
In fact, I believe like Russians have some setups and barracks along some of the areas of the border that were being discussed there. But the point is just that, you know, again, I can't get into every point about it. I hoped I made my case pretty effectively at the start of the show. Late Boomer, I appreciate Emma revising her positions, but take issue with Matt's attempt to correct her. Please. All right.
Oh, let him finish.
All right. With a dogmatic line that over-relies on new left anti-imperialism and pacifism, of which I have been a proponent for decades. The geopolitical location of Ukraine, Poland, Latvia, hard against the border of another imperialist power, requires a forceful response to, well, what does that mean? To enable them not to become a puppet state of Russia, as is now the case of Belarus. While this is not exactly analogous to World War II, the left position in 1939 wasn't pacifism. I don't think open warfare is the answer, but Russia, Putin must be punished for their open imperialist actions. Creativity is required, not repetition of recent dogma.
Yeah.
What does punishment mean?
That's the thing, is like these are enforcefulness. Like I first of all, good luck with that. I'm not going to help with that. I don't think you should expect the left to help with that. Like especially a foreign policy apparatus that has the track record it does of the just in the lifetime of us, right? I'm not there for it. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, punishment of Russia/Putin.
And who does the punishing? Sorry to cut you off, but who does the punishing? Is it America or is it the international community? I'm not interested in America leading on this shit. I'm just not, and I don't support it. I don't trust it. And like that's the thing is like a certain amount of events and Putin like taking and authoring his own destiny, and like let's say a further invasion, right? Like that. First of all, the left is responding to that. None of the left is like completely I mean, certain parts of the left have like stuck with like completely unrevised opinion of this stuff, but everybody's reacting to the actual events that are happening. Nobody like Bessner and Davis and those folks, they're not like sticking to what they're saying, but I think their principles are right. I think the principles that you're trying to push onto us aren't right.
I agree. And punishment of Russia/Putin, who do you think is actually going to get punished in that situation? The Russian people. I mean, we're talking about like punishing an autocrat or and a nationalist, and then we're gonna. I mean, he has been smarter than say like U.S. elites in terms of how he's dealt with the population, for example. But he will always save his own ass if we're gonna sanction and broadly punish the population. It's gonna fall on regular people, and I'm not in favor of that. I don't want regular people suffering. I like that Biden is using targeted sanctions. Other than that, as Matt said, I do not trust the United States to be a benevolent actor in this situation. Why should we? Congressional baseball fan, of course Jordan Peterson would be the guy that listens to Pink Floyd and agrees you can't have your pudding until you eat your meat. All right, let's take a call. Calling from an 860 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, this is Lindsay from Brooklyn.
Lindsay from Brooklyn. How are you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're not. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing Jack on to provide that extra context. My partner is half Ukrainian, half Russian. He has family in Ukraine. He's been following it, and it's been really frustrating just like hearing a lot of like tapes.
Could you back off your phone a little bit, Lindsay? I appreciate I just want to be able to hear you well, because this is I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective.
Yeah, totally. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, just you know, my partner, he speaks Russian and understands Ukrainian as well. So he's been following this since 2014 really closely. And yeah, it's just, you know, really, really, really glad that you guys brought Jack on to provide that additional context, because I think Ukraine itself also, people have been ignoring Ukraine's perspective, or like the people in Ukraine, and just that, like, you know, Ukrainians like they are a sovereign country. They want to be their own country. And like a lot of it, I think, has just the conversation has been focused on like America, or very, very U.S. focused. And like, I understand why, but it's also been really frustrating because it feels like the Ukrainian perspective has just been completely ignored. So I'm just, you know, really glad that you guys like brought Jack on to provide that additional context of what's been going on and and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make that effort after yesterday. So I appreciate the validation. That's always fun to get. And I don't know. Yeah, if you have any extra perspective, please go ahead to add.
Yeah, hey guys, this is Max, the partner.
Okay.
I did have another perspective, and I actually it's been really refreshing, because initially I was very frustrated because a lot of the Russian propaganda that's been around since 2013, since the Euromaidan kicked off, has seeped into alternative media in the West, and I follow both. I mean, I follow mainstream. I follow I'm a leftist from way back, and follow TYT Majority Report. And it's been really frustrating because you see a lot of Russian framing that really seeps into a lot of lefty circles. And it's actually really good now that there's a bit of a pushback and, a broadening of the context. I'm not saying, like America good and it's great, let's, have, NATO invade, and like be belligerent. But it is good to have a perspective, because I felt like the Ukrainians have been, because the Russians are really engaging right now in, I don't know what to call it, but it is denying that this country even exists. They're claiming it and have been denying it. And that's what's been the justification of their war in the East, in seizing Crimea. And you know, as a Ukrainian, you felt gaslit because even to defend Ukraine, you know, you're like, oh, you're a Nazi if you're defending. I'm like, well, no, like, you know, like, I don't think, you know, this is, you have the right to defend your country. You know, it's just like very basic. But I think the basic Russian perspective has been on this very chauvinistic. And I've been watching a lot of like just Ukrainian and Russian YouTubers go at it and have, you know, debates. And it is very jarring to see the perspectives. You obviously have good takes from both sides. And in any case, I'm just very happy you guys are, you know, had the guests you did on today, because I was really like just saying like, wow, what a great take. And also commending Sam, because Sam has been very level-headed when I was a little irked at you guys. So I appreciate Sam. He's been very good, I feel, in my, you know, as always, rational, even keeled.
All right, well, awesome. And sorry. Oh, thanks so much. We'll appreciate your call, and hopefully we'll keep doing stuff like that. Have a good one. Bye.
Take care.
All right, let's do some clips. Damn. All right. Well, while we're on this topic, let's just start with this great clip here. The Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations, Martin Kimani, gave a speech about the Russian incursion into the separatist parts of Ukraine, and he puts this in the context of post-colonial nations and how one should respond to imperialism and a way and regressive manners of thought that want to return to empire. I think this perspective is sorely needed, and it's very well said. Let's just take a listen.
Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. We rejected irredentism and expansionism on any basis, including racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural factors. We reject it again today.
I mean, really well said. What struck strikes me most is the phrase of looking backwards into history with dangerous nostalgia. Now, I mean, the continent of Africa and the nations that were drawn by the imperial powers that ravaged that continent know the consequences of empire better than anybody. And the United States is still behaving and has behaved as a belligerent empire in the present day, in the Middle East, and in terms of the covert presence in Africa as well, Somalia and other countries in Africa, the United States is still very much present. But the concept of looking forward and not yearning in regards to Russia and Ukraine for empire and domination because of the bloodshed that inherently entails is something that we all should heed. The borders may have been drawn, and very much in many cases were drawn recklessly, and there's no real way, especially in the former Soviet Union, to divvy up land in a way that's going to satisfy everybody. But how we move forward is by avoiding bloodshed at all costs and promoting national sovereignty and self-determination of all people involved is that's the best approach to international politics in my view. So, I mean, that guy was the man.
I'm frankly interested in people that aren't the United States talking about this.
Well, right. I mean, that's perfect. Right, though? I mean, who understands the consequences of domination and empire more than African nations? Nobody. Schaefer LM, you cannot be anti-war and pro-targeted sanctions. Sanctions are a tool of siege warfare, period. Doesn't matter if you're targeting civilians or the elites. Either way, you're waging war. As Michael used to say, no prevaricating. The position should be simple. No war, no sanctions, no military funding for Ukraine. I gotta disagree with you. I think you can target military sanctions very narrowly, or I'm sorry, sanctions very narrowly, but I would not go further, especially if it's going to affect everyday people.
I think it's in the context of I mean, look, I think the details are the devil's in the details with that stuff, and I think the expectation that it's not going to be super well tailored is what people should be guarding against. But I think like if Russia tries a difficult occupation, like I think that sort of thing is a response to aggression, right? Like that's sort of declaring the quote unquote war then, right? So like occupying a place with peacekeepers. Like I don't necessarily like I understand the point, and I think it's a valid at this stage in the conflict to be bringing up. But I also think like, you know, further aggression, then you can start to get into things like that. I mean, I support that way before I support you know, arming and putting any sort of actual like counterforce there.
Yep. Swanky new studio. Matt, Emma, the studio lighting and camera feed is absolutely amazing. It's high contrast too and professional. Also, congrats on last week and last month's viewership. Looks like it was your lowest. Okay. It looks like it was your lowest viewership in almost 2 years. I hope you learn and improve your programming content and not just the studio. Thank you for tricking me into saying an insult by starting it with a compliment. Glem Greenwalt. This isn't the 1980s for the U.S. to be the world police. The U.S. government as an arbiter of geopolitical conflict is not a left position. Uncle Mike.
And I will say, like, those preoccupations are a bigger thing than me than like being let's see how people phrase it on Twitter, like showing balls against Russia's like I think Russia sucks.
Suck on
Fuck
this.
Russia. But like I'm a member of this country, and it's also lied to me a number of times in ways that make me completely like I don't give it credibility in these matters.
Extra Fashy Candy says Matt's takes are almost always informed and worth analysis. So I meant no disrespect or even to be critical. Just hoping he'll slow down when discussing complicated issues of geopolitics, or his commentary informed by academic study.
No, I wasn't offended.
Okay. Uncle Mike 007, bravo, Matt. We've been at war for our entire effing lives. Let's try spending money on something that materially benefits Americans for a change. Well, that is something we can all get behind. Others are cool. From J. Cool's song, Kenny Lofton. Shout out to Black Man who beat the odds by yelling for hope today. He asked if I could Twitter y'all and tell you to vote my N-word. How could I... Why do I not read these before I pick them? How could I knowing what I know, it's a game of charades masquerading for the read the dough, read the teleprompter. These N-words is actors on the low. Yeah, I voted for the N-word because he got the best show. All right. I wish I understood what the hell you're talking about, but calling from a 713 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Alex from Houston, Texas.
Alex from Houston, Texas. What's on your mind?
Well, let's see. I was going to call about something else, but I forgot today was the war drum day, or I guess the day of war. So I had a little commentary I could throw in on that. So I don't know if y'all remember a couple of months ago, maybe a year or so ago. Remember Hunter Biden was on the board in Ukraine of a company. Do y'all remember this?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember what type of company it was?
Oil and gas company.
Exactly. Burisma. And it's amazing how that has flown under the radar. I mean, he's been collecting, John Pilger, famous war correspondent, just excellent Australian journalist. He wrote a whole thing about this years ago, back in 2014, I think. And Hunter was collecting 30 to 40K a month.
Yep.
Just sitting on the board.
That's true.
And I'm no fan of Russia at all. I have I'm not about to do their work, be a little mouthpiece for them. But at the same time, I mean, you got to wonder. And then here's the father is the president. It's just like, I really got to wonder, of all the you can just imagine the strings being pulled and all of that as being a pretext, to all this situation that, Russia doing their thing. I mean, it's just a great excuse for Joe to, maybe help Hunter out once again. I don't know.
I don't
maybe
quite follow.
Yeah, one, I think your point is valid in terms of like that did just show that there is a United States presence in Ukraine that is in favor of
like it's petty corruption. I don't quite think it's a plan for like a to trigger World War III. I don't think that follows.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I mean, but I'm certainly speculating. But in the back of my mind, it is something. It's just like, I mean, it's just so blatant. I don't know. It's the optics of it is just incredible, right? I mean,
it's not though. It's credible. This is what children of power
Chelsea
do.
Clinton was involved in things like this. I mean,
that's true.
The Obama kids will, I'm sure, certainly be involved once they're old enough and things like this.
And they're involved in this area because of the issues going on with it that led to this, right? Like that's why they're valuable, right? Like, and so like this does tie into American imperialism, but it's not like, Hunter Biden is not trustworthy like that, frankly.
And Hunter Biden, it's just a way to like, okay, we have friendly relationships with some of the oligarchs here in Ukraine. Hunter Biden can cash in. We have a presence in this region. That's really it, in my opinion. But you're right to look out for the corruption. I'm not sure it connects in this instance.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. It is business as usual, and I guess. Yeah, you're right, and
I mean, it doesn't help. It doesn't help, like navigate that Biden. And we talked about this. I think it was even more than 30. It was like $100,000 for like. I think he had to do like a.
No, it was 40 a month. It was like 30 to 40 a month.
Yeah. So it's incredible. you had to do like quarterly meetings. I think that's where I got the 100,000. So like you have to, for $100,000, you go to like a quarterly meeting.
Oh my God.
And you can do it even online. So yeah,
I mean, I get paid
it's awful.
$100,000 per show, so it's kind of equivalent. But
I mean, and if you're okay, let's think about it this way: if you're the right wing, I mean, look at what I'm saying. Why not just take what I'm saying and kind of run with it? I mean, wouldn't that be a great?
Because they want war. I mean, I mean, I don't know. They'll find a way to make a connection. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it, Alex. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sure thing. All right.
Later. Bye. All right, let's get to some more clips. Maybe have a little bit more fun, because this is the fun half. Oh God. All right, these two Tucker Carlson clips go together, don't they, Bradley? So, and they're 2 days apart, or a day after another, right? He's responding to his.
Yeah, so he talked about the first one on Friday, and then this was last night when AOC responded to his coverage on Friday.
Okay, so just clarifying that. Tucker Carlson.
The funniest of all was hearing Cindy.
Tucker Carlson can't decide if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a lowly bartender, scum of the earth, as he's, talks about the condescension of liberals, or if she's this.
The funniest of all was hearing Sandy Cortez describe herself as a woman of color. She often does. No one ever dares to challenge that description, but every honest person knows it is hilariously absurd.
What?
There is no place on earth outside of American colleges and newsrooms where Sandy Cortez would be recognized as a, quote, woman of color, because she's not. She's a rich, entitled white lady. She's the pampered, obnoxious ski bunny in the matching snowsuit who tells you to pull up your mask while you're standing in the lift line at Jackson Hole.
Pause.
They're all the same.
Relatable.
Yeah.
Relatable.
What the fuck are you talking about? We need to go back over this, because like
Oh, when you're waiting in line at this elite ski resort?
Yeah, when you're skiing?
Man of the people.
Like, I don't know what that is like.
When you travel across, right, exactly. So, okay. So he's trying to make her, she used the term Sandy to fit in with white classmates. Now he's weaponizing that against her to claim that it makes her white, even though explicitly she's talked about, I believe this came from her. And if not, I mean, it's really beside the point.
Yeah, she's the woman on hole 16 at Augusta National Golf Course that wants to play through because you're taking too long.
Is she? I mean, right. She's the woman who says that your diamond cleaning is going to take 48 hours as opposed to 24.
There's always one of these women in first class when you're flying across the Atlantic that just puts their feet right up against, put their knees into the back of your seat. And we, as populists, we hate these people.
All right, let's go back and watch. I want to watch the whole thing again from the start.
The funniest of all was hearing Sandy Cortez describe herself as a woman of color. She often does. No one ever dares to challenge that description, but every honest person knows it is hilariously absurd. There is no place on earth outside of American colleges and newsrooms where Sandy Cortez would be recognized as a, quote, woman of color, because she's not. She's a rich, entitled white lady. She's the pampered, obnoxious ski bunny in the matching snowsuit who tells you to pull up your mask while you're standing in the lift line at Jackson Hole. They're all the same. Doesn't matter what shade they are. Apparently, the editor.
What shade they are? Okay, so he's admitting she isn't like white or whatever.
I mean, well, that's actually the problem. Like, you can have like very rich women of color, and like maybe I don't know what like Tucker's trying to point, but like it's just about like shades. Like I don't know what like she qualifies, Tucker. Like,
right. So anyway, she responded to it and basically called it harassment. Here's Tucker Carlson responding to her response. I mean, like. Honestly, it's
more race baiting than harassment,
right? Of course,
that's a form of harassment.
What he's trying to basically say is that these non-white Latina people, I mean, she's literally Puerto Rican, people who are claiming that there's racism against them. You should completely discount it. You should discount her voice on this matter. She responds to it. Here's his response.
So we broke down on Friday and reviewed the new book about Sandy Cortez, the entitled congresswoman from Westchester, which was ridiculous. And of course,
No,
it
she's
was
not.
hagiographic, doesn't begin to describe it. It compared her to Jesus. And of course, she responded to it because it was about her, and anything about her immediately crosses her radar, and she can't resist either. So then she gets on Twitter.
Pause it.
And
dude, you know, like this is a part of it. He pretends like he's a guy talking at a bar to his buddies, and that's also like, will the mainstream media ever investigate this? He continually underplays his role in the discourse while also being the most influential conservative freaking fascist out there, who every right-winger is downstream from what he has to talk about. Like, he consistently does this, and here he is claiming like, oh, I'm just anybody. Of course she's going to respond to you. You're the top-rated cable host in the country.
And also, he mentions Westchester. He's from Westchester. Westchester is the county with the greatest income disparity in New York State. So,
yeah,
just to say that.
And the we don't even need to go over this again, but she's from the Bronx and at points went to school outside of there for a better life for her parents wanted to get her into a different school system. So, I mean, regardless. But again, she's a rich, entitled white lady who was from Westchester, and yet months ago, he was deriding the fact that she bartended to make extra money for her family after her father died. So I wish he could pick a narrative, but go on.
Assumes her natural pose, which is victimhood. So here's the most powerful people in the country telling you that she's oppressed. She's an oppressed person of color. Right. Quote, I genuinely want to know why Tucker Carlson is allowed, paid to engage in clear, targeted, libelous harassment that endangers people and drives so many violent threats that people have to fundraise for their own safety. Why should they have to pay for his harassment? Make it make sense. Again, note the narcissism, but note above all, here is once more one of the most powerful people in the United States of America, the world's most powerful country, telling you that she is a victim. She is a lawmaker.
Pause it there for a second.
But she.
Tucker, likewise, one of the most powerful people in the country, at numerous occasions has said that he's been making grandiose claims about being a victim of government surveillance and that sort of stuff. Never really
nothing materialized.
Substantiated that, and we just all have to move on.
Yeah. Okay, keep going.
He's oppressed. This is the posture they all assume. It's passive aggression. It's feline. There's something especially disgusting and dishonest about it.
Disgusting.
But here's the most interesting part. So Sandy Cortez talks about how she's threatened and she's got to pay for protection. Well, taxpayers fund her ample bodyguards, of course, even if she defunds the cops for everybody else. But the truth is, some people do need to fundraise for protection in the society that she created, where political differences can invite violence. Those people who do need to fundraise for protection would include, say, the Canadian truckers, or the January 6th defendants, or Kyle Rittenhouse, to name just a few examples. But they're not able to do that anymore. Why? Because people like Sandy Cortez agitate to choke off their fundraising. This is an attempt to suppress their speech and put them in danger. So if there is a victim of the system, a system that she helped create and supports, it's not her. It's the people who actually need protection but can't raise money.
What?
They always accuse you of what they themselves are doing.
All right, so he couldn't there because she basically said he's libelous, he's slanderous, he should not be able to spew this on airwaves, which I agree with. I believe that there should be stricter standards for that kind of stuff in this country. And if Tucker wanted to do his own independent thing, no one's going to censor him there. He knows he can't say that, so he has to do a hard pivot to the truckers and the January 6thers because they can be his proxy for victimhood in this situation.
Also, just a rhetorical point. He sounds more and more like Alex Jones every day with the voices and shit.
Oh yeah, he's a up and down and in between and like fucking nut job laugh, Joker-fied.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a lot of Jokerification of Tucker recently.
Dude, he's a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous person. Ooh. All right, let's
do Shapiro.
Oh, Shapiro, huh? I hadn't even planned on that one. We actually have a lot of good clips today. Just give me a second to pull it up.
This is
Yep. On Elon Musk, that's the one you're thinking of?
Yeah. This is, if you remember Ben Shapiro, famously of the Steve King is not a racist. I should find those tweets actually. Like Steve King actually is the farthest person from a racist ever. And then like a year later, it'd be actually Steve King is beyond the pale. I don't know what's going on with
Yeah,
Steve
the
King.
Republicans thought he was too racist to even have around anymore, which says something about Steve King.
Anyway, Ben Shapiro's doing that again. You know, defending powerful, highly placed capitalist reactionaries from criticism, which is his job. And here he goes.
This is frightening stuff. So all of this should frighten you. But here's the thing. What was the left all hot and bothered about yesterday? What the left was hot and bothered about is the fact that Elon Musk tweeted out an internet meme about Hitler.
Hot and bothered?
This is what the left was super worried about. So just to get this straight, if a Black Lives Matter activist attempts to murder a Jew in Louisville, this is not anti-Semitism. Even if his page is loaded with not anti-Semitism. However, if Elon Musk makes a Hitler joke about a leader who has now invoked an Emergencies Act to freeze bank accounts and utilize dictatorial power, Elon Musk must be secretly a vicious anti-Semite. And he tweeted out a meme of Hitler. It said, "Stop comparing me to Justin Trudeau. I had a budget."
Yeah.
Okay.
So whether we want to call this anti-Semitic or minimizing Hitler,
yeah,
is maybe, you know, yeah.
Would you say, I don't know, Matt, you read a lot of history. Would you say that minimizing Hitler might have anti-Semitic implications?
I think that's possible. I don't think, like, our only reaction on the show was that Trudeau shouldn't have done that, and there should be like a judicial process at least for that. That said, like, I don't jump straight to Hitler for this. Like, I think when we start talking about like diseased foreigners and the need to lock them up in giant cages like that, if I were to invoke Hitler, like that would probably be where I would do it rather than, you know, people trying to move money across borders.
And it's interesting he mentions Hitler within the context of the Canadian truckers because I don't know, maybe people want to look up what is said in the Canadian trucker chats that have been leaked about or maybe
Hitler's
about I don't know, maybe some Hitler sympathies, but yeah, keep going.
Right, that's a very old internet joke, right? What's the difference between ex-politician and Hitler? Hitler had a mustache, right? These are very old internet jokes.
What?
They're not anti-Semitic. Okay, like let me explain. As a person who has been attacked with probably more anti-Semitism than nearly anyone in American public life, I can safely say that is not an anti-Semitic meme. But here's the thing: the left gets angry at memery, that they can try to generate outrage about anti-Semitism, but actual attacks on Jews, they don't give any craps. They don't care at all, like not one iota, because always the double standard applies. If you're on the left, you must be good. If you're on the right, you must be bad. If you're libertarian, if you don't agree with the left, you must be bad. The true anti-Semitism is Elon Musk tweeting out Hitler memes, not about the Jews, but about Justin Trudeau's treatment of dissent. That's it. That's real anti-Semitism. Black activists trying to murder a Jew, not actual anti-Semitism.
Who said that?
It's such a straw man. No one has made the connection between those two, but he takes one instance and another instance of memification. Right? Memery, which makes less sense, but can keep going.
I mean, Shapiro is the fact that if he gets more anti-Semitic abuse than anybody else, it's because it's because of the waters he's fishing in. He appeals directly to people who like support modern apartheid. That's why he said the thing about like Arabs like to live in sewage, or right? Like, okay, you appeal to that sort of sentiment. Guess what? The racists love that shit, and they have a little bit of a feeling about you being Jewish, Ben, and like I guess you're sensitive about that. But
it turns out that there's a huge overlap between anti-Semitism and racism because that's just under the general umbrella of bigotry. So it's like, I mean, someone like Dave Rubin is more likely to receive homophobic attacks from where he's fishing, as you say, Matt, than for if he were to be on the left. To answer Ben Shapiro's question, yes, the left is good and the right is bad. That's the reality.
Daily Wire, March 13th, 2017. Media accuses Rep. Steve King, Republican of Iowa, of racism. They're lying. Read his actual words.
Updated
And then
that's one like lengthy update. You usually see a sentence or two.
Updated. Let's just read this full update. On January 10th, 2019, Representative Steve King reportedly said, I love that already, reportedly said, holding out hope and giving like people a warrant just to like not believe it as fake news. White nationalists, white supremacists, white civilization. How did that language become offensive? In light of those statements, this article gave far too generous an interpretation of King's words. As I stated in the article, there were two ways to interpret his sentence.
Wait, you got to read it right. As I stated in the article, there were two ways to interpret his statements. His later open embrace of the terms white nationalists and white supremacists suggests that the first interpretation described below was not as implausible as it seemed at the time.
Implausible to who? The people on the left, or the people on I'm all mixed up for which the clause is there. But anyway, this is the original. This is the thing Steve King said. Geert Wilders, who's like a European like white supremacist thereabouts. Wilders understands that culture and demographics are our destiny. We can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies. And that was what Ben Shapiro decided to get on his hobby horse and say everyone's lying. Not only is there the other, he said there was two in this update, he's like, there's two different interpretations, and one of them is not as implausible as it seemed at the time. But you literally said they're lying, right? Yeah. That's not having a different interpretation. But anyway, Ben Shapiro is a liar on behalf of powerful racists.
And not shocking that people might make the connection between Elon Musk's bigotry potentially, even though, you know, like he's posting Hitler memes, because he, I think we mentioned it before, is currently being sued, I believe, due to racial discrimination and segregation in his California plant. So might make sense that he has other bigoted views as well, the way he casually sanitizes Hitler.
Yeah, the lawsuit follows 3 years of investigation into Tesla and alleges that Black and African American employees at the company's Fremont plant are segregated to the lowest levels. These numerous complaints by Black, these numerous complaints by Black and/or African American workers about racial harassment, racial discrimination, and retaliation lodged over the span of almost a decade have been futile. Tesla has continued to deflect and evade responsibility. While it claims to not tolerate racial harassment or discrimination at its factories, Tesla's investigations of complaints are not compliant with law. And there's some horrible details to this. Tesla turned a blind eye. For example, Tesla allegedly is slow to clean up racist graffiti, including ones with swastikas, KKK, or the N-word and other hate symbols that were drawn in common areas and on the factory machines. And yeah, I mean,
let alone his background of his family getting rich off of apartheid
and Musk's Emerald Mine stake. And I mean, Musk, I think his response was something along the lines of like, you know, there might be some unintentional slurs, and we hope people can get around that and, you know, move on like that. This is an empowered racist.
Union Jack. Emma, Matt, I need your help to tackle an issue in our union. We've identified 8 of us who have funded the trucker protests and are openly anti-CRT in schools. It is against our progressive values. I can't have them in our union because when we protest, I want shared values. How do I manage the situation? Dude, I don't know if you can kick them out. I mean,
I am not the person to advise on purging unions.
Yeah, I think you need all the help you can get despite odious views.
I think you have to stick it out. If other people in other unions have recommendations that are contrary to that, but I don't know. There's work to be done, I guess.
Swanky New Studio. Thanks, Emma, for the compliment on the IM. I actually won a bet against my roommate, and I worked hard to craft that. Worked beautifully. All right. I mean, okay. So you're saying you're happy about my sarcastic praise of your insult. Okay, got it. Stupid Sexy Candy. Apologize for my garbled IM yesterday in regards to Tucker. What happened to the USB that was stolen in the mail that supposedly had all the election fraud evidence on it? I know. I mean, it's still pending. Says who? NATO is America's outdated way of trying to keep its hegemony. I agree. If the EU was responsible for their own defense instead of relying on NATO, they could just offer Ukraine membership in the EU if they wanted, and then take care of their own nation states' territorial disputes without involving the U.S. military.
Sounds like the type of conversation we'd be should be having at this time. That sounds great. Maybe that's preferable to saying people should grow some balls and other sort of psychoanalytic things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a piece also in Responsible Statecraft. Again, I'm not endorsing anything, but just check it out if you want, about the possibility of Ukraine being designated as a neutral nation. Bernadotte, I'm sorry, but I can't see any good reason to break up NATO at this time. And I say that from Norway, which borders on Russia. Obviously, I don't agree. When NATO does, America's bidding in unjustified wars, but it's also a crucial line of defense for those of us in Europe, especially the former Soviet states that want to be independent. I've been trying to keep an open mind, but it just sounds incredibly dangerous to me. I agree, in this current climate, it's probably not the thing that needs to be at the forefront. Grandstanding Oppression Party. Have you seen The Gilded Age on HBO? I am not sure if it is a wake-up call for people or an indoctrination, normalization, and or romanticization trying to convince people it's good for the oligarchs to control us and we should aspire to do the same. I mean, I know Cynthia Nixon's in the show, so I doubt that if the message is of that she would have signed on to it. But look, who knows? I mean, she's just an actress. Not just an actress, but in that particular context.
I've watched a little bit of it. My girlfriend watches it. I haven't watched it. Like I missed the first episode and maybe another one, but it's like good. The budget is nice. As a representation of sort of Gilded Age New York, I like it for that. I don't know.
I love period pieces.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. Like I think like I don't watch stuff. If I watch stuff, I'm not really watching it that critically for politics that often, but like it's definitely like an upper crust sort of show. There's a little bit of upstairs, downstairs, like Downton Abbey sort of thing where you get the servants class. That's semi interesting, and there's some racial politics in there that's okay. It's not a, but I wouldn't commend it on its politics. I think it's more just a dazzling show to look at.
H-Dub, why do y'all guys write more negative comments when Emma hosts? And I do mean guys. I mean, I can't see. I think you might have answered the question, but I can't really see into everybody's soul. So, all right, let's do some more clips. It's already past 2. Okay, this is pretty nuts. The former Michigan Assistant Attorney General, Andrew Shrivel, which might say a little bit about his psychology here, was for some reason testifying in the Florida State House and wants, in the year 2022, contraceptives to be either banned or severely limited. You heard that right.
I just want to give a little context about this guy. He was fired because he was found to be publishing a blog solely to harassing a gay college student at the University of Michigan.
Here's
perfect Republican.
Here is Mr. Shrivel.
Dude, change your name to
Hormonal long-acting reversible contraception does not reduce abortions. They often fail, and when they do, women are more likely to choose abortion. In short, the contraceptive mentality is what fuels the bloodthirsty abortion industry in our country. Moreover, many LARCs themselves actually act as an abortifacient, meaning they cause an abortion of a preborn child by preventing the human embryo from being implanted in her mother's womb.
Yeah, this guy seems to know a lot about women. So I wonder if Mr. Shrivel has ever touched his shrivel in a private moment, because to quote Elle Woods in Legally Blonde, every masturbatory emission could be constituted as what did she say in it? But regardless, that could be a loss of sperm and thus means a loss of life. So if Mr. Shrivel has either involuntarily or voluntarily created some sort of emission in that area, that might mean that he's also responsible for the loss of preborn children.
What's this guy's first name?
I don't know.
Andrew?
Penis Shrivel?
Andrew Shrivel. Andrew Shrivel.
Andrew Shrivel.
I think the type of guy who would, I mean, I don't know where you find the time. Like on top of the moral implications, like you're gonna what did you say he was doing? He was harassing a student at Florida College,
Michigan. Yeah, because he's from Michigan, but is for some reason testifying at the Florida State House.
Okay, sorry, that was why I was confused. Shrivel was fired using state resources for his campaign against University of Michigan student body president Chris Armstrong and for lying to investigators during his disciplinary hearing. Like that, this guy has something psychologically severely wrong with him, and I don't think this is the last time he'll appear in the news.
So Florida is currently considering a 15-week abortion ban. It's headed to the Senate floor for a vote at a certain point. This is a part of what they're debating here. But this guy, I mean, he's now, in order to reduce abortions, I'm sure he's in favor of banning it entirely. He also wants contraception severely limited. Basically, if you have sex, you should be punished because Mr. Shrivel seemingly can't. Allegedly, I mean, just many people are saying, then everybody else should be punished for deigning to have sex without the prospect of procreation.
Yeah, I just want to read a little bit more details from this case here. To be clear, and this is Attorney General Mike Cox. To be clear, I refuse to fire anyone for exercising their First Amendment rights, regardless of how popular or unpopular positions might be, Cox said in a statement. However, Mr. Sherville,
No, I'm going with Shrivel.
We'll call it Shrivel. However, Mr. Shrivel repeatedly violated office policies, engaged in borderline stalking behaviors, and inappropriately used state resources. Our investigation showed he showed up to Armstrong's home 3 separate times, including once at 1:30 a.m. The Attorney General quote says, that incident is especially telling because it clearly was about harassing Mr. Armstrong, not engaging free speech. The free speech defense has gone fucking insane.
Yeah.
And I would say if I'm a free speech warrior, I would take a little bit of care about who's like flying my banner and what purposes they're putting it towards. Because let's continue. Also, he engaged in behavior that, while not perhaps sufficient to charge criminal stalking, was harassing, uninviting, and showed
it's not up. Yeah. We're still, yeah, there we go.
Called Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office Armstrong's employer in an attempt to slander Armstrong and ultimately attempt to cause Pelosi to fire Armstrong, and then attempted to, quote, out Armstrong's friends as homosexual, several of whom aren't gay. So, I mean, not that it would be good to out them if they were gay, but I mean, this is a total freak that, of course, is the type of person that state Republican parties need to lead these charges against reproductive rights.
Kid tested Politburo approved, writes in, Mr. Cox and Mr. Shrivel definitely the cast for a Daily Wire movie. Okay, I wanted to get to one more thing, I believe, or maybe we got the things I wanted to really. No, this is what I wanted to do. The trucker convoy again. So this might have been from a few days ago. This is one of the organizers of the Canadian Trucker Convoy, Bob Bolus.
Great names today.
Yeah. And it kind of rhymes with the strategy that he's about to lay out about how the protesters should conduct themselves. Now, I don't know why it's like the requirement of like every old conservative POS man to film themselves in this way, but here he is describing the strategy and the traffic that the trucker convoys should cause, and except, then we'll reveal to you who this guy really is after he makes this argument.
We intend to circle Washington, D.C., and basically, I'll give you an analogy of that of a giant boa constrictor. That basically squeezes you, chokes you, and then swallows you, and that's what we're going to do to D.C.
There's a lot of people that don't want that to happen and certainly want to be able to get to work, get to where they need to go, to have emergency services reach them in the event of an emergency. Do you understand the risks that you're putting in place by doing this?
There'll be a lane open for emergency vehicles to be able to get in and get out and all that. We will not compromise anybody's safety or health one way or the other. As far as if they can't get to work, geez, that's too bad.
How long
They got a bunch
will you
of
be
idiots in Washington. Pardon?
How long will you be parked?
I have no idea.
So, Scranton area businessman Bob Bolus has returned to jail. This is from, damn, when was this? The Times Tribune. Can't get past the paywall. Okay, May 2014. Returned to jail to serve the rest of his sentence for his conviction on insurance fraud charge. So, Mr. Bolus, owner of the Bolus Truck Parts and Towing in Throop, failed to report to a jail, prompting Judge Garolo to issue a bench warrant Friday. This is from 2014. Now, you know, we're being told that this is all... Okay, this is Carl Behar here. The more I read about this guy, the funnier it gets. He isn't a worker. He owns fleets of trucks. This is the point. And multiple properties over the years. Longtime partisan Republican activist and big donor, also a convicted felon involved with all kinds of shady financial dealings. So, like, when you hear certain segments of, I don't know, the alt-left, people who pretend to be on the left, claiming that
Max
you're...
Blumenthal.
Right. Those kinds of folks claiming that this is you're not being supportive of workers if you are not supportive of the trucker convoy.
Yeah, they're full of shit.
This guy is a capitalist. He owns a bunch of trucks, a fleet, a truck company. He is not a working class trucker in this instance. And here he is advocating for like a big boa constrictor coming around the swamp, tightening everybody in, all those swampy pro-vaccine people. For again, they are protesting just like coronavirus restrictions that include saying maybe you should probably get vaccinated. And then in this business, you sometimes have to wear a mask. A reminder, there are basically zero restrictions at this point. We live in socialist hellscape Brooklyn. We can go to a concert. We can go to a, if you're vaccinated, you can go to a concert, you can go to a sports game, you can go to a bar, you can go to a restaurant, you can do whatever the hell you want. And it's even looser in every other part of the country.
Yeah, and you know, there's been some pushback against, you know, I mentioned the Teamsters not coming out in support of the convoy, and Jimmy Dore and Richard Wolff talked about the Teamsters, and unfortunately said that it's all because they're PMC cucks that they're not. I mean, I don't want to over generalize that, but I don't think it was. People say we should have Wolff on. That's not the type of statement I think we should have him on for. It's frankly embarrassing. Like I think like here's and why it's because it's true that unions occasionally aren't as militant as they should be, but militant for what? And I would just like to cite another of Canadians' parties. Canadians Marxist-Leninist Party has denounced the Freedom Convoy, this is Carl, as a right-wing astroturf. And here's a little bit, a section from it. The demands of the promoters of the convoy are suspect from the get-go. This should be obvious. For instance, while they protest the Trudeau government issuing mandates, those organizing the entire affair behind the scenes in Alberta themselves rule by decree. This includes the Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, whose approval ratings have consistently been among the lowest, if not the very lowest, of any premier in the country. Kenney himself was in Washington, D.C. at the National Governors Association meeting at the time of the convoy hit Ottawa, where he raised with the members of the U.S. Congress and governors to demand for the U.S. to end its vaccination mandate for truckers entering the U.S. and for favorable deals for the oil and gas sector his government represents. So again, this was all oligarch oil and gas bullshit. And I'm sorry that I'm frankly, shout out to Ben Norton getting out from that gray zone bullshit, because they've completely let their credibility on fire, in my opinion. And they can keep trying to double down on it, like this biopolitics or whatever the fuck they're going on about, but it's just right-wing propaganda. And maybe they can have the Brownstone Institute guy on, talk about how businesses should get reparations for it, and some other right-wing think tanks, and, you know, talk about Soros stuff. But like those folks, it's funny because I think like even I maybe I didn't watch the video, I saw a thumbnail for Hinkle, like thinking that they have a victory here, and that like, but when you actually look at what these people have been doing, it's now they're hitting the Teamsters. A few months ago, they were hitting the Chicago Teachers Unions. These are right-wing propagandists.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the other day, like a few weeks ago, Zero Hedge got some. It was claimed as a Russian disinformation by the United States, and I'm just like, oh damn, Gray Zone wishes they got that headline, and we're big enough to pay attention to in that area. But regardless, like, yeah, this is this is who these people are.
Anyway, talk about it with Jay Bhattacharya. Let's see if we can get any more other Stanford Hoover Institution epidemiologists. Yeah, let's hear more from them, Max.
Yeah, and to me, honestly, what bothers me a lot about their conception of workers, or like their active hiding of the ball, or I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to say, the active way that they mislead their audience is by relying on this conception of workers as essentially white men and mythologizing them to a degree. And there is a complete erasure of Black and brown working class people in this country who are in cities, who are not, smearing soot on their face in the way that these
I don't mean to cut you off, but it's not just the racial thing. They're obscuring the actual unions and the actual people organizing on this front.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say that as well. Like, it actually really undercuts class politics because it makes it really, really shallow. And they're into cosplaying about it as opposed to actually understanding and looking at poverty and working class rights in this country and unions. And when they go after unions, that's the exact result. So it's a right-wing project.
Anyway, good for Ben Norton.
Yeah, right, for sure. All right, let's take one more call. All right, we'll take two more. Oh, nope. That person just dropped. Calling from an 847 number, or I'm sorry, 8464 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
Yes, this is you. Who's this?
This is Dan from Boiling Springs. Called a couple of weeks ago. I meant to say how much I was enjoying your participation in this, and I think that you're doing Michael's memory a great service by doing this.
That's really nice. Thank you.
But I've been thinking a lot about the right's monopoly on philosophy. And by this, I mean, there's a lot of Jordan Peterson types talking about.
We were just talking about this yesterday. And wait, I'm sorry. Did I get your name and where you're from?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Dan from Boiling Springs in South Carolina.
Sorry. Yeah, I think you actually did say that. Yeah, Dan. So we literally, Bradley and Matt and I were talking about this after the show, or even might have just been Bradley and I, about how, yeah, the right wing has dominated philosophy culture. So very, very timely stuff.
Oh, cool. So I'm, truth be told, I do have a traumatic brain injury. So I have experience with neurological disorders. So I've been looking into things like left, right brain hemisphere perception, things like this. Mm-hmm. And so just to wrap this up, what it's taught me is that we see the world in different ways depending on which hemisphere we focus on or focus with, rather. So a lot of this data we see keeps us engaged in the left hemisphere, which is the more reactive hemisphere, the one that's responsible for reacting to immediate stimulus. So like, in the caveman days, saber-toothed tiger comes, you react. You don't have time to philosophize about that. But the right hemisphere can contextualize that. So like say after the attack or after that happens, they can say, well, why did that happen? What went wrong? How can we do better? So to cut to the chase, with social media being what it is, and people understanding enough psychology that they know that if they keep people engaged, constantly stimulated, that they never have a chance to really process the information. The barrage of nonsense is so fast and furious. And I think we saw this, and I know you guys talked about this a lot with like the Trump effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so much goes on, you can't keep track of it all. And that's by design. So when you bring these conversations to left spaces and let us talk about the meaning of consciousness, like perhaps the notion that all matter is conscious, from certain philosophical perspectives can be applied to politics. Like, how would we behave if physics discovered that matter has a form of consciousness, or if all living beings had at least a baseline form of consciousness? So when we're acting in the world with our environment, we're acting with a conscious living being. Now, just for an example, like, this is a kind of a conversation we can have. And what I think would be a breath of fresh air for us, we're very wrapped up in our minutia of policy, and we lose track of that just like everyone else. And when we don't take a step back, like I'm so glad you're doing with this Ukraine situation and bringing broader context to this, to bring it back to somewhat of what the other callers had to say. And to tie into that, my neighbors are Ukrainian, and it's very worrying. You know, just overall, there's this existential dread. It means, you know, this means seeing some of our adversaries through a lens where we're not necessarily assuming motive. But if we look at it, to tie it back to the neurological lens, if we understand that society is trapped in this left hemisphere way of thinking, then we can see how people are trapped into constantly just assimilating information and never actually thinking through the other side. What is the broader context?
Are you using left and right? Are you using left and right brain colloquially? Because just my understanding is that's not really. I mean, and I don't want to. I know you've been through a lot.
Go ahead.
My understanding is that's not necessarily how that works. But in terms of like the spiritual point that you're making, I'm very sympathetic to that.
Okay. Well, so I'm literally speaking because what we've discovered. I read this, and I'm reading this book by a Dr. Ian McGilchrist. I would love for you guys to invite him on if you could, anyway. But he's studied 20 years of patients like myself with brain deficit, so people who have only one hemisphere or, you know, the other, or people who are schizophrenic where damage affects more specifically one or the other hemispheres. And there's a specific difference in how brains operate. And what we see is how the brain attends to information is different, although you're right, the brain, all the brain is attentive at the same time. But data, like the brain communicates signals back and forth, up and down, and from front to back. So all these happen at the same time. But each hemisphere, if you look at the brain, right, we see that it's split in two, right? Mm-hmm. And so each hemisphere is responsible for perceiving the information differently. So the left is responsible for handling the limbic system, that information that's necessary for survival. And again, the right hemisphere tends to put, like, so for instance, a schizophrenic doesn't have, has an impairment in the right hemisphere. So they can no longer differentiate between a real person and a fake person, but they can still function. Whereas if you're missing the left hemisphere, you can contextualize, you know the difference between reality and non-reality, but your ability to, your motor function would be different. You may not be able to actually speak. So, and again, like I'm just getting into it. Like I just read up on some of his stuff if you have time. It's really fascinating because it does tie into how we see the world geopolitically. And in a spiritual sense, I mean, there is a spiritual sense, which I think, I wish Michael was around. I wish I could talk to him about this because it's such his vibe. But anyway, I think I've taken up enough time. I just would like to throw that in terms of putting perspective into our data, because we never have all the data. And when we operate, the important thing, just to finish this off, I know it's taking a long time, but the left hemisphere is very reactive. So our fear-based emotions, fear-based reactions are often happening in that left hemisphere. So we have to understand that we're sort of operating on a baseline, what can we trust, what can we not trust kind of place.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm like, this is not, you know, my area of expertise, but a lot of what you said is resonating. So I do appreciate it, Dan. We got to jump, but thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you for taking my call. I love what you guys are doing.
Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thanks.
All right, that is the final call of the day. Gonna hang up. Sorry, guys, if you were on the line. Take a few more calls yesterday. This was just a pretty big news day. Says who? Matt, the Gilded Age feels a bit like Downton Abbey. Is because Julian Fellows wrote both. Sort of feels like New York elite contracted him to give their dynasties the Downton Abbey treatment.
Yeah.
Making them seem somewhat human instead of the cold-blooded megalomaniacs that they were / are.
Yeah, I do think like the same sort of critique of Downton Abbey applies to this, which is that it gives a warm sort of glow to.
Did you watch it? Just like how like everyone gets along, the servants
Downton?
and the elites, yeah.
Even the radicals, it's bad. But it reminds me of if you're in New York City, there's what's called the Merchant House Museum, and it's this old, it's the oldest, I think, existing like sort of mansion from like it's like 1829, and you can go through it, basement floor where all like the servants would have cooked and all that stuff throughout the different types of floors, and to the very top where the servants slept.
Wait, what's it called?
It's called the Merchant House.
Merchant House.
Yeah, it's sort of by NYU-ish area. I've been to it 3 times. It's my favorite place to go, sort of museum to go to in New York, and that's what Gilded Age reminds me of. Though their houses in Gilded Age are much bigger.
Wait, Matt, is that the Tenement Museum or it's different from Tenement?
It's a different
Museum?
one, yep.
Different. I mean, I went to Tenement Museum on field trip growing up. Did you, Bradley? I feel like every New Jersey kid did. Wayne Kerr, I think the left gets in trouble with large philosophical statements because they're so concerned with the minority. For instance, if you try and say for most people the most rewarding, important thing they will do in their lifetime is be a good parent, the left is going to first react to the heteronormative assumptions there. I mean, maybe this is a controversial statement. I think that philosophy, much like judges, and the way that they go about their business, makes it easier to strip out context. Not that I don't think philosophy doesn't have a place, but I think that philosophy is often a way for people to commit to an ideology that makes them feel secure and smart if they become dogmatic about it, and does not allow for nuance or context. And I think that creates fertile ground for reactionaries.
Yeah, it's the difference between inductive and deductive logic, where deductive, you're just following from theory. I think like inductive, where you start from lots of observations and generalizations, like that's more interesting to me. I think that is, I think, the fundamental, and that's why I'm frankly more interested in history than I am in philosophy. I think philosophy is, I turn to that just as a way to understand what I've read in history.
Yeah, I mean, look, I took a few philosophy classes in college. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but people who I've talked to who are philosophy nerds tend to be like radical centrist types and or conservatives.
They like love the Constitution and weird shit like that.
Yeah, yep. Imagine loving the Constitution.
I mean, not our good, left-wing philosophy folks. They, of course, know that it's silly.
Yes. Prairie Fire Kowalski. This is a long one. Howdy, Emma, Matt, and Bradley. This is a lengthy one, so skip it if time is an issue. I haven't really expressed this point with you folks until now, and I have some lengthy discussions with some folks in the MR and left reckoning chats that Biden likely pursued the least worst option in dealing with Russia in this situation. Biden isn't a dove, but is a product of the Cold War and understands the futility of 2 nuclear powers going at it directly. I was saying before the show that I'm honestly a bit sympathetic to some of what Biden's, the position that he's in here, because I do think they're putting diplomatic solutions at the fore. I
mean, that's the thing, is like we had the conversation about the false flag video sort of thing, and ultimate thing is like, if like in the best viewing of that gambit, it was like to try to stop Russia from doing something, right? And
that was Sam's position.
The problem is that like we blew their credibility on stuff like yellow cake uranium and stuff like that in the Iraq War, so nobody buys it.
The blustering of Biden isn't a dove, but is a product of the Cold War and understands the futility of 2 nuclear powers going at it directly. The blustering of U.S. military personnel to ensure Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states stayed calm was right. The USA took the lead, and NATO won't escalate due to a reactionary Eastern NATO state. And now with what it looks like is an early Rasputista and hundreds of Javelin rocket launchers makes a Russian ground campaign a very costly option. That makes Ukrainians safer, so keep the weapons flowing in. I get many don't like the funding or arming of far-right elements in Ukrainian to ensure their sovereignty, but I would like to point out that many of the soldiers in the USA used to liberate France, the Philippines, and the Low Countries in Denmark were segregationists, not good people. The states, these people are tools, not individual actors, which isn't good, obviously, but it's just the case of what states do. Also, Ukrainian can't go, I think you mean Ukraine. Also, Ukraine can't go on the offense against Russia with these weapons. Ukraine is too small to do anything against a nation 3.5 times its size, and also they have nukes. Russia could just be another European country, but due to the financial interests of Russian elites, they're trying to do their own imperial thing at the expense of the Russian people. The situation is complicated, and I know I left many points out, but the problem here is capitalism and states that actively work against the interests of common people due to the current incentive structures. Left is complicated. Agree. Not sure I agree with you about the arms point, but it's always snowing in Ottawa. They took away Tucker's M&Ms, so he needs to creep on actual women. And he can't be attracted to a woman of color, so she's a white snow bunny. That's funny. All right, Sam, I want to compliment Emma. I couldn't invent a person I'd rather sit next to at the bar. That's very nice. Above and beyond her obvious expertise in politics and sports, I'm impressed by her knowledge of various popular culture from a way before her time. Like today, she laughed at the Pink Floyd reference. Yes, I do like... I'm not a huge Pink Floyd fan. I'd say I dabbled, but, you know, I like to... I have a very old person's music taste that's not really hip or anything. And I have no idea who's like popular these days, but that's besides the point. Nightmare blunt rotation. It's priori versus post priori reasoning. Jordan Peterson types are all priori.
There you go.
Okay. Velociraptor. That's funny. Philosophy is a process of abstraction, and abstraction is where humans can hide from the ambiguity of reality. Conservatism is a fear of reality that can only be assuaged by comforting mythology easily provided by pure abstractions. Oh,
there you go. Well put.
Well put. I screenshot some of these great IMs and I saved them. I just did that for that one. We're going to do like 5 more of these and get out of here. Fierce deity, really moving words by the Kenyan ambassador. Never thought about it that way. Like, it's important to advocate for sovereignty, but also understand that the nation state is an imperfect human construction founded on violence, and there will always be those who wish the borders were different. Those wishes do not always need to be settled in blood. Even more reason to demilitarize borders and allow people to emigrate to a nation they feel represents their homeland if the arbitrary borders aren't to their liking. Well said. They called him Mr. Shrivel. Yeah, the door-style alt left will act like this as beginning of a general strike and support their right-wing insanity.
I mean, is that about the convoy? Isn't it over?
Pretty much, but they're trying to spread it throughout the U.S., right?
Yeah, I mean, throw some eggs.
Left Libra. Okay, but seriously, it's past 3 days past where the mass shooting happened at a left protest and barely a peep about it beyond IMs on here. Are you waiting for something to come out / happen to discuss it all? No. Let's just include a story about that in the packet tomorrow. I'm sorry. Portland shooting, there were IMers about it. It was in there. Okay. Sorry, guys. It's a little bit more on my plate when Sam's out. So just please bear with me. I'm trying my best. All right. I'll promise. I'm writing a note down right now.
And also, just
Portland shooting.
Sorry to interrupt you, Emma. Just to plug
okay.
the AMQuickie, Corey did touch on it in the issue this morning and yesterday.
Perfect.
So it'll be there too.
Okay. Kid tested Polybrio approved. Didn't she call it a genocide or something in Legally Blonde? No, she's like, you know, the guy in the fake case, he's like trying to claim that he has no parental right or he's not the father, basically. I forget exactly what the case is, and maybe I shouldn't reference it until I have a whole grip on it, but you know, you live and you learn. Lefty Sparky. Happy Tuesday, Matt and Emma. Off topic, but do you guys think LGBTQ rights are going to be under attack because of our predicament with the courts? Getting nervous here in rural Indiana. Thanks. Left is best. Yeah, I do have a lot of fears about that.
I mean, that's a front. Like, I certainly wouldn't want to go on record saying the GOP is not going to open up that front again, particularly like the way things are moving now. It would be I mean, it to me, it's just strategically, like, if I'm taking out my morals and I'm just advising the GOP, it seems stupid to me to do that.
They're doing it in Florida. Don't say gay bill.
Right. But yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my fear, is there's going to be some copycat bills throughout the country, and just, stay safe out there. Random info. In the path of old school near future social science fiction like John Brunner's Stand on Zanzibar, I think about Brunner's concept of involuntary dosing drugs called truth or consequences given to political figures, causing them to tell the truth in public appearances, and how such a tale would include a Tucker Carlson figure. His mind is a very scary place, but I'm sickly curious as to like how he actually feels about things. Two more. Something I heard on Al Jazeera from Mopping Up, something I heard from Al Jazeera that I believe framed the situation perfectly, is that Putin doesn't want a Soviet Union again. He wants to be a czar. Yes, and Iammer said this earlier. Americans today just have no context of that and have created a fiction of Putin as a USSR boogeyman. And the final IM of the day, Sklandil, please end kink shaming on your show, good people. Don't use the word cuck. Sorry. You wouldn't feel comfortable regularly insulting people by calling folks, wow, this is not F words or whores or a whole host of other derogatory terms. If you don't understand why this shouldn't be used, I'd be happy to chat. I don't know if I'd be happy to chat. I'm going to be honest. We're using it
go outside.
We're using it facetiously, but I, again, all right, this
no promises, but noted.
No promises, but noted. Right, exactly. I can't end on that. I can't end on that. Here's the final IM of the day. Come shower with Crowder. To the person who wants to purge members of their union, don't try to. The demographics are not at the point where you can afford to choose who's in your labor struggle, and no one should lose their job or union status for odious beliefs. Agreed.
Yeah.
Matt and Bradley, thank you so much for your help today and everything. Appreciate all you guys. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and